So I think we can start now. Welcome to our third panel today. On the first panel this morning, Tom Medak was talking about these prospects for a coalition between trade unions and this kind of non-institutional left that is working in the domain of civil society, not in the party system. And he was talking about this upcoming wave of new privatizations of public services or commodification of certain state-provided services. And he was talking about that some kind of common interest can be found for these two groups, in the sense that for the activists or this civil society type of left, the rise in prices or the commodification of certain services is a problem as such. On the other side, besides that, for the trade unions, the problem is that this kind of privatization also, we have lots of examples, are usually resulting in the worsening of the working conditions for the workers working in this sector. But I think besides this common interest in terms of political coalitions, we can also find a deeper common interest that usually trade unions do not talk about it. They do not take this problem into account. That also, besides this common interest that I mentioned before, just in terms of commodification of social services and some kind of public services or their privatizations, the real wage for workers is going down, because if you don't have access to the state-provided services, which was unconditioned, if you have at the same time the level of your wage is the same in the monetary terms, nevertheless your wage in real terms is going down. Also, problem is also the other aspect of this process of privatization and commodification is that a huge amount of reproductive labor is delegated from the state provided services to the households, meaning that we all know most of that labor is being done by women. Also, the other part, if you take these trade union problems in perspective, that they are not, in a sense, dealing with the problem of the households in terms of housing, in terms how do workers resolve their housing issue. Be it we all have here, but not only here, this inflation of credits to households in terms of credits that be mortgages to buy apartments. That also is connected to the problem of wage and problem of labor and the problem of private debt. But this panel, don't be afraid, will not be about trade unions. It will be about something much more sexier. It's social reproduction of labor power from different aspects. The first panelist, Iva Marčetić, who is an architect living here in Zagreb. She worked for numerous architectural offices and bureaus in past years. Yes. She's now unemployed for 2 years. For 2 years, also she was a member of Pulska Grupa that represented Croatia on the Venice Architectural Biennale 2 years ago, 1 year ago. 1 year ago, and also she's a member of Young Anti-Fascists of Zagreb and member of editorial board of magazine to be published by that same organization called Nepokorni Grad, and she's writing in different independent magazines in Croatia about urbanism, housing, special politics from the perspective of an architect or class-aware architect, in a sense. So, first I will give word to Iva. The title of her presentation is "First We Take the House, and then we take you know what." Okay.
Hi. this okay? Okay, so Marko learned my biography by heart, which is wow. And also, it was
just one brief. Sorry for interrupting you. Just a bureaucratic thing. Please sign this list of participants. We have to. Sorry.
So, well, when he asked me to speak here, he said that, you know, I should talk about something that I write, whatever that is. I was not sure how to approach that issue when it comes to a conference of such as this, and I will try to bring the issue of housing, but within the coordinates of what it means to design architecture or to have urban planning, because usually those two are not connected. Housing is something that is a political problem, that is something that is usually devised inside of some kind of grander institutional scheme. And architecture and urbanism usually comes second to the fact. And it is very, both for architects or the institutions, hard to combine those two and to understand what is really the connection. So I will start with the quote which I like from Dolores Hayden, the author of Grand Domestic Revolution, who says that architecture can either support or impede ways of how people negotiate patterns of life. This is very a broad definition, which I liked very much, because she puts in the same way, in the same sentence, architecture as a tool, as a materialization, and negotiations. I like this, that negotiations of life are connected with architecture, because when we talk about how our cities are shaped, we are precisely referring to the issue of the way how we negotiate the conditions of our reproduction, how much control we can exercise, and which concepts of buildings, our surroundings, come to the fore. So in order to even begin understanding what that means, and this is a field which is, I'm not speaking like I know how that's to be done, but so we have to talk about housing, because the term housing policies is a point of departure, where we can say that social history meets spatial history along the class and gender lines. To understand what housing in a modern city connected to the urban planning means, I will start with, thank you, Jelena. I will start with a historical overview of the foundations of modern urban planning. I will begin with this document, which is the most influential document of urban planning in the 20th century. That is something that many of you know as probably. It's called the CM resolution. It was made in the 30s, and it developed some almost 100 of observations and conclusions and demands directed at the town policy makers, and describing the city as an assembly line that needs to function as smoothly as that of a factory. It divided city planning into 4 zones, which we still operate with. That is dwelling, work, leisure, and transportation, and gave formal directions as to how these mechanisms should be designed. This is somewhat of a general knowledge, but I would like to emphasize that, of course, CIAM was not made in a one broad swoop and everybody agreeing. It had within it waves of a so-called apolitical wave and a so-called left-wing wave, which finally resulted in a left-wing wave losing the negotiations and being actually thrown out of the CM. So the final So the final resolution actually was made into something that is much more formal than transformational. In the light of that, I would like to I like also this, like, this is the amendment that was thrown out of the resolution, and it says that the idea of modern architecture includes the link between the phenomenon of architecture and that of the general economic system. Town planning is the organization of the function of collective life, the redistribution of land. The indispensable preliminary basis for any town planning must include the just division between the owners and the community of the unearned increment resulting from works of joint interest. This meant that those proposing transformation of land relations strongly believed that only within that transformation and different organization of patterns lies the power of changing the postulates of architecture and urbanism, and that just formally cleaning up the city has nothing to do with the profound change they imagined the modernist movement would bring. I'm giving this lesson, history lesson today, which I'm not sure is it boring or not, but because these what is known as a functional city and the rules by which it operates is still something that we can discuss today as a legacy of this formality that was employed in the planning of the cities, and depending on a different organization, a different economical organization, and basis upon which certain national economies or such were based. Depending on that, those formal agendas mean different things, and we have seen in the 20th century in Europe, especially after the World War II and up to the 70s, the cities becoming somewhat of much more pleasant places than they were before the war. Large amounts of social housing was built, communal facilities, parks, childcare, and such. And those things were all built inside of this basis that I was talking about, but they were built in such a way as to improve material condition of the working class just as long as the working class had the power to negotiate the terms under which such planning was executed. And after the 70s onward, and with the privatization of social housing all through Europe, it doesn't have to be just the socialist systems, and land becoming increasingly more the currency than the actual need. Those conditions changed. So I have this this is Novi Zagreb. This is not a very good picture, but I also like this one because this is from a site called Failed Architecture, which is very interesting. This is Novi Zagreb. And then I have like this new development in Zagreb, new social housing. I like this contrast, how the windows are so much smaller in the 21st century than they were in the 20th. Speaking to the fact that, I mean, on a very banal level, that the quality of social housing devised today is, even in a technical way, much worse than it was. So as I had already jumped to Yugoslavia, because we cannot exclude Yugoslavia from this conversation, I would like to begin with also with the end of Yugoslavia, with the privatization of production, or the new laws that brought it about in the end of the 90s and beginning of in the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s. In 1990, the law that passed that citizens by themselves and workers are from then on exclusively responsible for their housing, for procuring their own housing unit, effectively eliminated the possibility that those new owners who were buying the production inside of the city or or the state itself, were not anymore responsible for this particular part of reproduction. No, but mechanisms that were put in place before that were with one swoop kind of destroyed in the 1990s, and establishing the system that does not have to worry about this. It changed the housing issue changed from something of a broad, this is called a broad policy of housing, into a very specific issue of social care and thinking about and those who cannot take care of themselves. I like to note that parallel to this, because there was a lot of discussion about the right to housing and housing as a commodity, which is important when you look at it in a historical way, what the right to the housing meant in Yugoslavia. But I would like to note that in Constitution of Croatia, there still stands that every citizen of Croatia has a right to decent housing, which means that we nominally hold that right, but if we don't have the power to exercise that right, that means absolutely nothing. So I don't think that talking about it has some explanatory mode in discussing, that can be explanatory when discussing housing. So the crisis of the 80s actually created a huge gap. Like in 10 years, the number of houses, socially owned housing, fell from some 11,000 to 5,000, and besides, Yugoslavia was never building enough of housing. The huge gap was created, and in the 90s it opened up, like with the commodification of housing, it opened up the biggest part of planning, dwelling, the biggest zones in the percentage of zoning in the city, to this market logic and to a constant, which is very convenient. I realize that housing is somewhat like drugs. You can, like a drug market, you can never, there's always a demand. You can never go wrong with housing somehow, even though it can, yeah. So, that was a good joke, huh? I'd like to, I like to say that not until the end, through the 90s, there was a need for housing, and that was solved with these ad hoc solutions or whatever. But at the end of the 90s, and in both, say, and Croatia and Serbia, I know those two, so that's why I just consider them. All the policies, state policies concerning housing, were leading towards bank loans being the only possible way of getting into buying a house. There was no any kind of mechanism that was, even if you were to try some kind of other collective organizing or whatever, which I'm not sure that it really can apply here, but it was, all the mechanisms were systematically pushed into this logic, where you had these state-sponsored kind of policies with savings, bank savings and such. To me, it seems as if there was just an elaborate way of putting public funds through the banks and legitimizing it through individual consumption of an apartment. So, what I was talking here, I've shown this a lot of times, and this is the way that official plans look like. And this, well, of course, according to whatever planning philosophy, this is, you have housing, which is this M sign, you have parks, everything looks very clear and logical here. But here's the zoom on one of those locations where you have a factory that by zoning plans is turned into housing, which means that it doesn't have any more, that it becomes this profitable point in the city, which is probably more profitable for the future investors than the production itself. But what I wanted to note here is that by having these, like next to it is a big park and such, by having these communal services, by having this, what made the modern city something that was much more enjoyable to live in than before. Than before the war, was now it's used as a price hike. There is nothing, whenever you as an architect try to plan or design some kind of urban communal space, there is always this relation towards the hike in prices that will happen subsequently with the housing. So this is so being that there's this quote, I'm not sure that it's right, but I like it from the New York Times, that says that space has become the global reserve currency, and by that like this is the destroyed production inside of Zagreb, which means that that the land under it is probably worth more in the market than the production itself, which is very interesting. Okay, so now I'd like to turn to some. Am I okay? Okay, I will try to. I would like to turn to to South America, which is very interesting these days, and to look at their housing policies in order to come to be able to come back to Europe and to discuss what is lacking. This is Chile, and this is Chile's policy on housing, which I would like to actually to discuss through. I will discuss Chile through design. And first I will explain how it works. This is Chile has this Ministry of Housing that in 2001 created a policy that called dynamic debt-free social housing, which meant that the government, that they realized that debt assigned to housing, especially to social housing, was not, I guess, very good for them, because they had people were falling through on their, I don't know, mortgages or whatever, and so they decided to subsidize the full amount of social housing. You have to apply. You have to be poor enough in order to do so. You have to apply through social security offices, and funding was done through this whole Housing Solidarity Fund, which is, I think, financed centrally from Ministry of Housing, through Ministry of Housing. And so by increasing this subsidy, eventually so this is what they built. By increasing by government paying the full amount, the actual price of the house was lowered, because cumulatively what people paid by getting into debt was more than what government paid in one take. So what this meant for the city was that the developers and the government were trying to find lots for social housing that were more and more far away from the center of the city, and also to bring the square meters of the house possible to build to the complete existence minimum, which is not even an existence minimum, which is 25 square meters. So this is what they have done. But then they made, in 2007, Michelle Bachelet made this policy where, okay, so I'm too long. So that the government would subsidize the land, which also produced a lot of corruption and whatnot. And the architects actually, what they did was, there was a lot of protest demanding better housing. What they did, they actually decided to use design as something that they could work with inside of this horrible kind of situation where they called it some kind of rational design working inside of the parameters that you have. They built only half of the house, but used design in a sense that it could bring about the safe self-construction, which meant in the end that the people were filling up the gaps within a previously organized way. This housing, this way they made about 1,000 units, which is nothing in the housing market or in the if we speak about social housing, but it brought to the fore this this question of architectural need, in such a sense that it needs some kind of autonomy, but it needs to be part of the system in order to. These architects, which is very interesting, they are. I said they were Harvard-educated architects. So that means that they brought the knowledge from the beginning of the 20th century from Europe, where the part of the price of the house was solved by using the labor of the settlers themselves. This is the strategy known from the beginning of the century, 20th century. This is Venezuela. Venezuela has an infinitely more complex system, which was devised through, because Chavez brought this emergency law for land and housing, and through different ministries and institutions, through the through the National Bank for Housing and Habitat, has made certain funds that were able to build housing. I'm now rushing, I don't know what I'm talking anymore, but what is interesting in Venezuela, that when we compare it also to Yugoslavia or whatever, they have this system of territorial organization, which is something that we did not have. Through assemblies de vivienda, the assemblies, which are something that is a territorial unit, that comes from a certain place. They designate a certain land and the need for housing. That land is then nationalized, and then the housing is built. They also have the special ministry for Caracas, because Caracas is huge. And in Caracas, they use this strategy of relocating people into this bourgeois city, and finally giving people from the outskirts the benefits that the city had, the bourgeois city has. There's a lot of criticism about they've built like 500,000 of housing in Caracas alone, or housing units in Caracas alone, but they are building that in the with the underdeveloped design tactics and lack of any kind of real communal space, or without adequate building technology, and but yeah, well, they're building a lot of it. So this is how this looks like, which is very, if you compare it to, say, Yugoslavian so-called social housing, it's very dire. And see, the materials also used are very short-term materials and such, which is, yeah, they're building it without some kind of strategy. This is this other Caracas, which is a very known kind of syntagma in Venezuela, where you have like other Caracas, and they're trying to make one Caracas. They're bringing this other Caracas into this Caracas in order to make one Caracas, to Caracas. So I will try to bring this to an end. I have I'm going back to Europe, actually to Yugoslavia again, and to just put these these points, like we have seen these examples in this kind of organized housing policies, which are good and bad in many ways. But if we compare it to Yugoslavia had centrally conceptualized planning, land division through the right, and blah blah. You can read whatever there is written. But the thing is, it never used these concepts of building inside of different typologies, using the knowledge on land in order to create communal solidarity, or in order to create some kind of a territorial focus inside of the housing policies. But it also had what is very important, and that is, I really feel this centrally conceptualized planning. It had strategies. It had something that lacks in these examples that I've shown you. Of course, it had the redistribution of housing done in this through workers' councils and such, which is very important. And I think usually usually it's always like you had to wait a long time in Yugoslavia to get an apartment. Well, of course, I mean, right now, but the thing is, the criteria for getting an apartment were up until the end of the 80s the same. From the 50s, it was number of kids you had, a number of years you worked. So it kind of, it was by that points were measured. Of course, less and less, I guess, of the housing produced, there was more corruption and such, but in the end it produced a standard which, the average apartment Yugoslavia produced was 59 square meters, which is something that nowadays cannot even be imagined. So what I like in the end is that I like this. I would like to kind of end with this. That this is what Holjevac, the mayor of Zagreb in the 50s, said to Edvard Kardelj. Well, somewhat changed. Main thinkers of self-management system haven't a clue to what it means to create urban planning, and he also persuaded, I guess the story goes, the Kardelj to bypass the federal authority when it comes to the value produced in the city, for the city, and establishing of housing funds. So I would like this to be the end, but I have one more. This is the formula that from one of creators of Red Vienna, Otto Neurath, in the beginning, well, in the 20s, 30s, and such. He devised this very banal formula, which I think is very interesting. Urbanism plus organization equals urbanistic progress equals a greater chance of happiness. And in the end, he said, he wrote to the CM, which I mentioned before. He wrote to them once they kicked him out. Everything can be solved given some consideration, but it is as little a graphic task as it is that of an architect. It requires transformation. But this is an old song I have already whistled and jingled to you in different variations. So by that, I hope I was coherent and would like to finish. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, and I hope that these examples from a recent past and from some current models that are being enhanced in South America will provoke discussion about the way how the left should posit itself in terms of, in this domain, in terms of these debates that are somehow being neglected by the left, in the sense that they belong be it to the aesthetics or be it to some kind of depoliticized social care. So now I will give you a word to Dora. Thank you, Dora, for the presentation and for this the way you connected the level of analytical insight with the implications for the solutions to the political problems and all the contradictions that we met in that we can meet in this translation, so-called translation process. So now we will. Yeah, I forgot to. Yeah. So I will now open the discussion and for comments, questions, whatever you want.
Okay. Two questions. First for Iva. You had a slide with 6 points, and I was kind of wondering what that was. You moved so quickly, and I didn't get the chance to kind of look at it thoroughly. But I did notice that the first point was something about centrally planned housing, and the last 2 points were about the surplus produced in the city that should be kind of implemented in the housing and primary education, and distribution of housing should be overseen by a workers' council. So
it was like was.
Yeah, but the two. Again, I don't know what in fact this is because it's not written. But the point 1 and 5 and 6 are seemingly in contradiction, because if you have a centrally planned whatever economy or housing or whatever, then you cannot have a lower level unit deciding, making important decisions. And that was in fact, like on many different occasions and on many different levels, the contradiction of the Yugoslav self-management system. So if this is Yugoslavia, okay. That's basically a question for Iva.
Answers, please.
Okay, so I will first answer Mislav. First of all, this was, not will, and this is concerning urban planning, which is quite, maybe there's a confusion in terminology, but when it comes to city planning, there is what I tried to also to point out with the policies in both Chile and Venezuela, that when you don't have the strategy which is conceptualized in some way centrally, in a sense that you have some kind of a urbanistic plan which can serve as a strategy for both, if nothing, then hygiene and transportations. You cannot have workers' councils drawing up maps of highways. That is just probably not going to work. But then when I'm saying this, I'm saying you cannot have. This is what you didn't have. It was what was interesting in that kind of planning. If we talk about Zagreb, for instance, Central Office of Urbanistic Planning was formed in the 40s, and then as the city developed, you had separate divisions of planning inside of different territories. So, but you had some kind of central conceptualization of the development of the city that has its roots even from the regulation plans from the 19th century, which envisioned some kind of a development in that sense. So that's why I think that kind of strategy is very good when it comes to city planning question. I hope did I answer it?
Well, I still don't know. This was Yugoslavia then?
Yeah. Okay, so this was like the 6 points where the city planning and the production of housing and distribution meet in Yugoslavia. So I'm sorry if it was, yeah, okay.
Hi, just a quick question to Iva. Well, actually connects a little bit with the claims about emancipation of women in the socialist bloc, which, you know, it's a risk. It's a move that we need to do, but then again, it's very risky. And so the question I wanted to ask you is about urban planning, and namely, how do you take that into account now? You have this centralized urban planning, but it produced a massive urbanization all throughout Eastern Europe, Yugoslavia too, and with it, what we can call a mass production of the nuclear family in the apartment blocks. So this it recreated basically the atomic family, right? The nuclear family. It even had models in the urban planning systems, you know, the 2+2, right? So how does that factor into your calling back for a centralized urban planning process? Because this is it's an ongoing process, and the transformations within the nuclear family, I think, and this mass production of the nuclear family still very much determine a lot of what is going on right now. The rebirth of masculinities, of patriarchy.
First, I'm not sure that what is central planning in a sense, central conceptualization of planning of the city, that it has actually much to do whether you emancipate through actual building or not. In a sense that it depends on what you centrally conceptualize, and which you have to centrally conceptualize, because the city is the amalgam of many things, and they coincide with one another and need to be seen in a broader sense. So you need to have some kind of a plan. The measure of control over that plan, in a sense, the measure that comes from, say, working class or whatever, or bourgeoisie for that matter, is the precise question of these negotiations and political power that certain class has. But so that's how what I was saying, that the main zoning I don't know, categories or such depend, their meaning depends on what how we negotiate them. But in terms of when we speak about Yugoslavia and precise design of housing and such, and creating of the family, well, that's a broader issue. But I would like to say that design itself did not go towards a transformation of this relations inside of the family. It didn't go well because there was not enough inclination, and that inclination persisted somewhere else, not exactly in architecture. That's an issue that can be even broadened more. But the thing is, Yugoslavia, for example, had very competent research facilities in order to determine what is the most economical and best typology of the apartment itself. But it did not, you cannot change the relations inside of the family by changing the typology of the apartment. You have to have a much broader how do you say, consensus or whatever, on what it means to change, to actually transform the social relations inside the family. We had that up until the 50s. There were these communal kitchens, there were inside of the factories, inside of the communities and whatnot, but it wasn't really something, it was very banal, as it was in Soviet Union, but it was never developed. That is because there was not enough inclination to do that. And centrally planned, centrally conceptualized urbanism does not have much to do with that, in a sense, directly. Did that answer it? Or okay, thank you.
So we have to conclude this panel. Maybe the best way is to be in a formula combined of these two presentations. The question is, so will German Democratic Republic plus post-Keynesianism provide a better chance for happiness? So now, just announcement in 15 minutes is the keynote lecture today, Mario Candeas, so just 15 minutes break and then we continue. Thank you.